It's time now for perspective. In the wake of the Christchurch massacres just over 2 weeks ago, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Arden has promised to reform the country's gun laws. She's already announced a ban on military-style semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles, and new firearms legislation is set to reach the country's parliament this week, although some are wary about the speed with which the government is trying to pass its plans into law. Well, to discuss the future of New Zealand's gun laws, we can speak now with Philip Alpers, who's an Australia-based expert in global gun legislation. He's also director of gunpolicy.org, which is a global project of the Sydney School of Public Health. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on France 24. Now, new firearms legislation is set to be introduced to the New Zealand Parliament this week. What exactly does the government want to see changed?
Well, it was actually only an hour ago that they announced exactly what they're going to change, at least to begin with, and that is there is a promised ban on all what they call military-style semi-automatics. Now, they're commonly known around the world as assault rifles, and those are completely banned now in New Zealand and will have to be bought back at fair market price from their owners and then destroyed. But also, the more powerful are what they call centre-fire semi-automatic firearms, shotguns and rifles, are also going to be completely banned, with some exceptions. But anything that's got more than 5 rounds can fire any more than 5 rounds of ammunition, or can accept a detachable magazine, which makes it capable of doing that, is now completely prohibited, and that will make it impossible in New Zealand to buy the weapons that the mass killer in Christchurch used.
Now, Jacinda Arden has said that the legislation will be passed as a matter of urgency and that as such it will miss out on the normal public consultation process. There is, as you might imagine, a bit of a backlash to this. 11,000 people signing a petition against doing it this way. What do you think the government should do? Should they listen to these people?
They have been listening to these people for 22 years. That's how long. There have been at least 4 official inquiries, police inquiries. A retired justice of the High Court did a $1 million report many years ago in '97. They were all ignored because the gun lobby simply overrode. The gun lobby controlled gun policy in New Zealand for many years, and now suddenly they've been outflanked and outpaced, and they can't complain about it happening quickly because they've been delaying it for nearly a quarter of a century.
Is there something specific, do you think, about Jacinda Ardern's mode of government that means that this is happening now rather than at any point in the last 20 years?
Well, it might even have to do, no, I'm being flippant, but it might even have to do with Australian and New Zealand rivalry. It took John Howard, Prime Minister John Howard, only 12 days to bring in his gun laws. It took Jacinda Arden 72 hours to announce hers, and it's taken her about the same amount of time, 2 weeks, to really flesh them out and make everybody aware of what's going to happen. But you've got to remember that at least the opinion polls are showing huge support for this. There's hardly anybody who's against it. Even the gun lobby came out today and said, we will support most of this or some of this. There's still a bit of battling to be done, especially over registration. New Zealand was almost alone with the United States among developed nations in not having registration of most firearms. That is, when the firearm itself is counted and kept by a record of it is kept by the police. And so that has yet to be decided. But by and large, New Zealand has come right up to Australian standards. And that is really the highest standard amongst all developed nations in terms of a comprehensive, right across the board, holistic approach to firearm injury prevention.
Now, you mentioned just now Australia's gun legislation. Can you tell us a little bit about how Australia came to adopt such comprehensive anti-gun legislation back in the 90s?
In 1996, Australia suffered a huge massacre, 35 people shot dead at Port Arthur in Tasmania. But that was just the last straw. They'd had a string of 13 mass shootings with 117 people dead over a period of a decade and a half. And it was Australia they couldn't take it anymore. And so there was this huge attitudinal change right across the country. A newly elected, very conservative Prime Minister saw this happening, realized that something had to be done, and, as I say, within 12 days changed the law. Now, what happened then was that they banned all military-style semi-automatics, all semi-automatic long guns, shotguns and rifles, really, and those were the weapons of choice for mass killers. So they bought them back, they paid fair market price, and they destroyed them, nearly 750,000 firearms. Now, over a period of years, they destroyed 1 million firearms. Now, if you did that in the United States at the same ratio as Australia, you'd have to destroy 90 million firearms. So it was about a third of the gun stock in Australia was destroyed. What happened after that was that the risk of an Australian dying by gunshot dropped by more than 50% and has stayed there for the last 22 years. There's no sign of it going up again.
Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, this renewed debate about gun laws in New Zealand has received a lot of attention in the USA. Democrats praising Jacinda Arden for her leadership, saying it's time to tackle the powerful gun lobbies. The NRA meanwhile saying that it's not the same situation. America isn't New Zealand. Americans have their right to bear arms protected by the Constitution. What do you think we're likely to see in the US in the coming years as far as gun legislation is concerned?
I'm sad to say that this cannot be done in the United States. It's just too big. It's too much for the Americans. As with most of Europe, Australia and New Zealand see the American approach to firearms as being a bit mad. John Howard, the Australian Prime Minister, used to say that his country was determined not to go down the American road with firearms. He said that for 20 years. And Australians agree, and now New Zealanders agree. So they've decided to go in the other direction and to reduce the availability of lethal weapons to their population. So far, that has been a very conspicuous public health success.
Philip Alpers, expert in global gun legislation and founder and director of gunpolicy.org. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on France 24.
Thank you.